Growing up, I lived in a house that many would describe as nice. My father had a successful career selling farm equipment, starting from nothing to establish his own business. He excelled at his job, ensuring that financial worries were never an issue for us. In contrast, my mom never worked, which was perfectly acceptable to Dad, as he wanted her to enjoy the life he provided. Her role as a housewife didn't involve much domestic work. Instead, she spent her days shopping, visiting salons, and socializing with friends. Dad adored her to the extent that he allowed her all the freedom she desired, which included drinking with her pals and spending lavishly. She occasionally even neglected to pick me up from school, but Dad simply sighed and defended her actions. When I was 10, circumstances began to shift. Dad had to travel to another state for a work commitment, something he was reluctant about, but had no alternative. Before his departure, I overheard him conversing with Mom in the kitchen. "Janet, please don't forget Rachel needs to be picked up at 2:35. Set an alarm if necessary." To which Mom retorted, "I'm not stupid, Brian. I can manage our daughter for a few days." However, that turned out to be untrue. The day unraveled like any other while Dad was on his third day away. Everything seemed normal until later. That afternoon, after school, Mom was nowhere to be found. I waited for about 20 minutes before deciding to walk home, a route I'd taken before under similar circumstances, since it wasn't far. Upon reaching home, I realized something was amiss as the house was locked and I had no key. Our neighbor, Mrs. Brandon, was outside tending to her flowers and noticed my predicament. "Oh, Rachel, honey," she called. "Your mom left with Emma and some friends for a wine tasting hours ago." Instantly anxious, I used the emergency phone Dad had provided, attempting to call Mom, but there was no response. As time dragged on, seated on the front porch, I tried repeatedly to reach her, but all attempts failed. Mrs. Brandon, seeing the chill set in, offered me a jacket. Despite the cold comfort, Mom still didn't return. Eventually, as darkness fell, I called Dad, my voice trembling. "Daddy, I'm locked out. Mom's not here, and her phone goes unanswered." Listening intently, Dad instructed, "I'm coming back immediately. Ask Mrs. Brandon if you can stay with her tonight. I'll get there as swiftly as possible." Mrs. Brandon graciously offered her guest room, yet I barely slept, alert for any sign of Dad's arrival. Reaching around 3 a.m., having driven nonstop from his distant business trip, Dad appeared exhausted but resolute, expressing gratitude to Mrs. Brandon before taking me home. We stayed up in the living room, awaiting Mom's return, though Dad urged me to sleep. I was adamant about witnessing her arrival. Not until 7 a.m. did we finally hear her car in the driveway. Mom staggered in, her elegant dress crumpled, makeup smudged, exuding the scent of wine. With wide eyes, she saw Dad seated calmly in his chair. "Brian, what are you doing home?" she questioned. Dad's voice, low yet boiling with anger, replied, "Our 10-year-old was locked out all evening, left with the neighbors because her mother was too preoccupied with partying to remember she existed." Attempting to laugh it off, Mom retorted, "Oh, don't exaggerate. Rachel's fine, right, sweetheart?" She reached for me, but I stayed distant. Swiftly rising from his seat, Dad bellowed, "Janet." She was distraught, calling in tears. What might have happened? Mom, defensive, whined, "We were having such a good time. I just lost track of the hour." Dad's temper resonated in the household. Your priorities should place your daughter before any social event. What kind of mother loses sight of that? Crumbling onto the couch, Mom wept, apologizing repeatedly, promising better behavior. Yet, something had irreversibly shifted after that. I noticed whenever Dad was absent, Mom's demeanor turned cold, even alienating. Where Dad's presence incited maternal affection, hugs, and inquiries about my day, his absence replaced them with indifference. This Cold War lasted until I turned 18, her facade as a caring mother resuming only in his company, teaching me to withdraw, isolated in my room, away from her intangible rejection. When I was 17, I found myself seeking ways to avoid being alone with Mom. Our already fragile family completely disintegrated when Dad fell ill. Initially, he was merely tired and had lost some weight, Nothing too alarming, but soon persistent stomach pain began, indicating something was seriously wrong. The doctors conducted endless tests, but couldn't pinpoint the issue. We spent what seemed like an eternity going back and forth to the hospital until we finally received a diagnosis, a rare form of cancer. In public, Mom acted concerned, but in private, her true feelings emerged. I overheard her whispering to her friends on the phone while pacing the kitchen. "It's just so exhausting. Do you know how many special meals I now have to prepare? And he's always home. I can't leave without him questioning my whereabouts. It's like being in prison." Standing in the hallway, fists clenched, my blood boiled as I listened to her complain about caring for her dying husband. I never revealed her callousness to Dad. He had enough to contend with without knowing that his wife saw him as a burden. For a year, Dad valiantly tried to maintain normalcy, making business calls from his home office between treatments, never admitting that cancer was taking its toll. I would bring him tea, sitting quietly as he donned a brave face for his employees and clients. Then, one day, he summoned Mom and me to his office. From the look on his face, I sensed something was wrong. "I'm selling the business," he announced, hands folded on the desk. "The doctors said I don't have much time left, maybe a few months." The air felt like it had been knocked out of me. "No, Daddy, no." I sobbed uncontrollably. Dad reached for my hand. "Rachel, sweetheart, I have to do this. Neither of you can manage the company when I'm gone. You're too young, and your mother, well, this isn't her field. I want everything I've built to remain intact to ensure you're both looked after." Mom feigned sadness, dabbing her eyes with a tissue while discreetly checking her phone when Dad wasn't watching. Her tears were as insincere as her designer handbags. Those were brutal weeks. Dad grew weaker daily. After school, I rushed home, abandoning my backpack at the door to head straight to Dad's room. I did my homework by his bedside or simply held his hand while he slept. During the day, Nurse Mrs. Jeffrey attended to him, ensuring he took his medications and ate. But Mom was scarcely around. When she did appear, she scrunched her nose and complained about the odor. "I can't bear being here all the time," she remarked one day, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "The smell of sickness is pervasive. I need to escape to breathe." Her real desire was to party, shop, and pretend her husband wasn't dying upstairs. When Dad's condition worsened, requiring his hospitalization, Mom stopped coming home at night, often returning at dawn looking far too jubilant for someone in mourning. One morning, I confronted her. "Where were you all night?" I demanded as she entered, wearing the same clothes as the previous day. "It's none of your business, young lady," she retorted sharply. I could smell alcohol on her breath. "Dad is dying in the hospital, and you're out partying? How can you?" In a flash, she grabbed my arm, her grip painful, her face inches from mine. "Listen carefully," she hissed. "You will keep your mouth shut and respect me, or I will make your life a living nightmare. Don't test me, Rachel. You won't like the outcome." Dad passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, precisely 1 week before my 19th birthday, with me holding his hand as he took his final breath. Mom was off somewhere getting coffee in the hospital. At his funeral, she put on a grand performance, donning a designer black dress, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and accepting condolences in a trembling voice. He was my everything. How will I go on without him? But once the last mourner left the cemetery, her demeanor changed entirely. Her tears vanished instantly, and in the funeral car ride home, she was already checking her phone, smiling at incoming messages. The subsequent week felt surreal. Navigating through school felt like a blur, my concentration almost non-existent. My friends tried their best to console me, but how do you recount to peers of your age the feeling of losing your father while observing your mother behaving as though she were liberated? Then my birthday arrived. I wasn't expecting much, yet I hoped Mom would at least acknowledge it. But she didn't. I didn't see her all day. She was gone before I woke and remained absent by dinner. My friends whisked me off to a cozy cafe downtown, bought me a cake, and attempted to lift my spirits, which helped slightly. That night, I opted to stay at my best friend Shirley's house, avoiding returning to an empty home on my birthday. The next morning, upon entering the kitchen, I was startled to see Mom with a stranger. He seemed around 36, at least 16 years her junior, with his arm casually draped around her waist, as if he belonged there. Mom addressed me. "Oh, good, you're here," sounding a bit irritated. "Rachel, meet Kevin, my fiancé." I paused mid-sip of my coffee, surprised. "You're what?" I echoed. "My fiancé," she repeated in a slower tone, as if explaining to a naive child. "And now that you're here, we need to discuss arrangements." The term arrangements felt foreign on my lips. "Yes, you must leave," she said, smiling, but it lacked warmth. "Now that your father is gone and all his money belongs to me, I can live how I wish and with whom I desire." Squeezing Kevin's arm, she declared, "That doesn't include having a teenager here." Stunned, I asserted, "You're throwing me out? This is my home too." But Mom, resolute, went upstairs and returned, lugging down my suitcase and tossing garments into it without folding them. "You're 19 now. I don't have to look after you. I want you out within the hour." "Mom, please," I pleaded. "Don't mom me," she replied sharply, cramming more into the suitcase. "I did my duty. I raised you. Now it's my turn for happiness." Left standing on the sidewalk, suitcase partly packed, I was overcome with loss. With no grandparents or extended family to turn to, Dad was an only child and Mom was estranged from her family for reasons she never exposed. I shakily called Shirley, who instantly offered me refuge. "Of course, you can stay here. My mom's been worried about you. She suspected something like this could happen. Come over right away." Shirley and her mom resided in a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town, where they set me up on the living room pull-out couch. They brought out their plushest sheets and even bought new pillows for me, which felt like a blessing compared to homelessness. Shirley's mom embraced me warmly, whispering, "Stay as long as you need, sweetheart." The ensuing week flew by in a whirlwind. I immersed myself in final exams, striving to maintain my grades though my world was unraveling. Late-night study sessions became my refuge from all-consuming thoughts. College now seemed an impossible dream with no home or finances. Panic seeped in each time I pondered my future. Then Mrs. Brandon, our former neighbor, reached out. "Rachel, honey," she spoke gently but with a taut undertone. "I needed to let you know about your mother's upcoming engagement celebration at the house next weekend. She's sparing no expense with caterers, decorators, everything." My stomach writhed. An engagement celebration. Dad had barely been gone a month, his grave yet unsettled. "I'm sorry, dear. I thought you should know," she added, trailing off in awkwardness. "We both knew I hadn't been invited nor informed." "It's absolutely disgraceful," she vented, displeasure lacing her usually gentle voice. The days following saw me oscillating between fury and sorrow. How could Mom abandon Dad's memory so swiftly? While I sobbed myself to sleep each night, clinging to his sweater for its lingering scent of him, she was planning festivities with a man young enough to be her son. Days after Mrs. Brandon's disclosure, an unanticipated call came, identifying the caller as Paul Walker, a notary. His voice resonated with seriousness blended with kindness, reminiscent of Dad's authoritative tone. "Miss Mitchell," he addressed, "I require you at my office promptly regarding your father's will. Handling matters remotely sufficed, but this necessitates your presence." He stood downtown, waiting to reveal the implications of my father's bequest. Upon entering, I was greeted by an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a comforting, grandfatherly presence. The room was filled with the pleasantly nostalgic scent of old books and coffee. "Your father made some very specific plans before he passed," the man stated bluntly, as he retrieved a hefty folder and adjusted his glasses. "The entire house, its contents, and all proceeds from his business have been left to you, Miss Mitchell," he informed me, as I blinked in surprise. Continuing, he added, "Moreover, your father established a trust fund specifically for your college education." He was very meticulous in his arrangements. Mr. Paul then reached into the folder again and drew out an envelope. "Your father also left this for you," he mentioned, sliding it across the desk. "He was very adamant that you read it privately." With trembling hands, I picked up the envelope, opened it, and unfolded the letter. As soon as I recognized Dad's handwriting, tears welled up in my eyes. The letter began, "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here. I'm so sorry for leaving you, sweetheart. There are so many moments I wish I could have been around for, your graduation, college years, your wedding day someday. But life doesn't always go how we want. However, what I can give you is protection. I need to discuss something challenging. I've been aware for some time about your mother's infidelities, her lover, her intentions for my money after my passing. I've overheard her on the phone, planning a future that doesn't include you. Please know this isn't for revenge. It's to safeguard my daughter. You cared for me during my illness. Your love was unconditional. As for your mother, she will have the car and jewelry I've gifted over the years, but you are to receive the house and business funds. Helping her, or not, will be your decision. I wanted to ensure she could no longer harm you by controlling your future. With all my love, Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely, as Mr. Paul respectfully remained engaged with his papers, allowing me a moment. As I gathered my thoughts, a question surfaced. "Mr. Paul, why isn't my mother here for this?" I inquired. Clearing his throat, and with some hesitation, he explained, "I made several attempts to contact her. When she didn't respond to my calls, I sent a formal letter concerning the will reading. She never replied." It was unsurprising, considering she was preoccupied with planning her engagement festivities, leaving Dad's affairs, and everything related to her past ignored. I left Mr. Paul's office in a daze, clutching the document folder and Dad's letter stored securely in my purse. When I reached Shirley's apartment, I recounted everything. Shirley enveloped me in a tight hug, and her mom immediately grabbed her phone, saying, "This calls for a celebration." She opened a delivery app and announced, "I'm ordering from that fancy Italian restaurant you girls adore. Tonight, we celebrate justice served." 1 month following Dad's funeral, and coinciding with Mom's engagement party, I donned the black dress Dad had bought me for my last birthday and applied my makeup with care. I was set to make a statement at the party. As I arrived, the house sparkled with lights, cars lined the streets, and sounds of laughter and music spilled onto the lawn. Walking in, I noticed the front door was unlocked, a sign of Mom's disregard for security. Inside, the living room was bustling, mainly with Mom's wine-sipping friends, each elegantly dressed with champagne glasses in hand. Kevin's acquaintances were distinct, eager to appear affluent. The decorations were extravagantly ostentatious, reminiscent of everything Mom loved. She had even taken Dad's photos off the walls. When Mom noticed me, her face lost its color, quickly replaced by anger. She marched over. "What are you doing here? Get out now," she snarled. Facing her guests, she laughed falsely. "Everyone meet my daughter. She just can't face living independently and is here to plead for return. But I must stand firm. Tough love." Her friends chuckled in sync, Kevin's friends echoing them, eyes full of smug pity and disdain, typical of the affluent's view of those deemed lesser. I presented a smile, not friendly, but akin to a shark if one could smile. "Actually," I began, my voice Mom echoed sarcastically, loud and clear, "I'm here to reclaim what's mine." She laughed dismissively, asserting, "Nothing here belongs to you anymore, dear. This is my house now." "No, Mom, it's not," I retorted, retrieving the will from my purse and holding it up. "This house is mine, as is everything in it. Dad left it all to me. The house, his business, his money, everything. You get to keep your car and your jewelry, that's it." The room fell silent, and Mom's face turned a deep shade of purple. "You're lying," she stammered. Sweetly, I suggested, "Would you like to read it, or should I call Mr. Paul, the notary, for confirmation? Better yet, should I contact the police to evict everyone currently trespassing in my house?" Guests began gathering their coats and bags, mumbling awkward excuses, not wanting to be part of such a spectacle. In mere moments, the room was empty save for Mom and Kevin. Mom switched to a sugary tone. "Rachel, sweetie, we can work this out, we're family. Your father wouldn't want us fighting like this." But I merely shook my head, pointing to the door. You're right about one thing, Mom. Dad wouldn't want us fighting, which is why he ensured we wouldn't have to. Mom didn't leave quietly. She never did anything quietly. You ungrateful little dash, she screamed, her flawless makeup smudging as angry tears streaked down her face. After everything I've done for you. Kevin awkwardly hunched nearby, his eyes darting between her and the door as if devising his escape plan. I couldn't help but let out a short, humorless laugh. After everything you've done for me? Like abandoning me when I was 10? Complaining while taking care of Dad as he was dying? Or throwing me out the day after my 19th birthday? By then, neighbors had gathered on the front lawn, drawn by Mom's wailing. Mrs. Brandon was there, along with the Donalds from across the street and the Mendezes next door, openly watching. This isn't over, Mom shouted, grabbing her designer purse from the couch. I'll get a lawyer. I'll contest the will. I shrugged. Go ahead. Good luck with that. Dad made sure everything was legally bulletproof. But sure, go ahead and waste whatever money you've got left on lawyers. And that was when I saw it, the exact moment Kevin's expression shifted. He looked at Mom as if seeing her for the first time and didn't like what he saw. The glamorous, wealthy facade was gone, revealing only a broke, aging woman with no house, no inheritance, and no way to get either. Janet, Kevin took a step back towards the door. Maybe we should take some time, to process all this. Comprehending what was happening, Mom's face crumpled. Kevin, baby, don't do this. We can figure something out. But Kevin had already reached his car, and as Mom chased after him, still shouting, he drove off without even a backward glance, leaving her yelling into the night. About time, Mrs. Brandon called, approaching to hug me. Your father would be so proud of you, honey. The neighbors rallied around, showing their support. Mrs. Timothy even brought a casserole, saying, You can't live on takeout forever. Meanwhile, Mr. Donald and Melissa volunteered to help change the locks, just in case. Over the coming weeks, bits of neighborhood gossip revealed snippets about Mom. Kevin had left her straight away. A woman with no money and no house was not what he signed up for. She tried staying with wealthy friends, but they were suddenly too busy to help. One by one, they vanished, just like Dad's money had. The last I heard, she moved to Louisiana to live with a second cousin, the only family member willing to take her in. She called me several times, leaving voicemails full of tears, apologies, and pleas for money. I blocked her number. I graduated high school with honors, just as Dad had always hoped. During the ceremony, Shirley's mom and Mrs. Brandon were cheering the loudest from the family section. Crossing the stage, I felt assured about my future, all thanks to Dad. The college fund he established meant I could choose any university I desired. I selected his alma mater, a top business school on the West Coast. I'm pursuing business administration with a focus in agricultural studies, thinking maybe one day I'll start my own company like Dad did. For now, my focus is on building a life devoid of Mom's toxic influence. I'm confident that Dad's final gift to me was ensuring my well-being.